What's going on, folks? Nate here, Two Wheel Dyno Works, and we are back on the dyno today with our Transalp, and this time we are testing the Dominator full system, per your guys' request. As you can see here, the full Dominator exhaust that we installed is the high mount variant. That was the one we were requested to test, and honestly it makes sense to test because there's quite a bit different bend angles and lengths here for this high mount system compared to a lot of the other full systems we've built mapping for so far on this platform. As far as fitment is concerned, it's pretty much the same as everything else. It was installed pretty straightforward and easily, didn't really have any issues, but there are two things about the exhaust that I do want to bring to your folks' attention, just because you may have this issue on your bike as well if you decide to install this system. First and foremost is the clearance here with our aftermarket fender eliminator and the stock turn signals. It's really close. It's not quite touching, but it's right there, and over time I can imagine, because this does get a little bit warm under here, that might get a little toasty for the plastic that the OEM turn signals are made out of and may pose an issue. And the other item isn't really so much of a fitment problem as more of a fit and finish problem. We opted for the black muffler because, well, the bike is black, and there's a very clear nick that we noticed on the muffler itself when we pulled it out of the packaging from Dominator. I will reach out to those guys. I'm sure they'd be probably willing to take care of it, but honestly, for a test pipe, it just isn't that big of a deal to us. However, we generally do resell these pipes when we're done testing them, and nobody wants that on there, so I may ask them to replace that because, well, it is pretty noticeable on a black pipe, and it's kind of an eyesore. But those two incredibly small gripes, I would say, aside, let's talk about how the bike actually performs with the pipe installed with our custom ECU mapping now that we've developed fueling for both the Baffle In and the Baffle Out, because there's a baffle that comes with this Dominator, and that's what everybody really wants to know. Now, this is the baffle that comes with the Dominator exhaust, and you can see it's a pretty significant necking down of the muffler itself, and in my personal opinion, it did not sound great. Twin-cylinder engines are pretty hard, especially the inline twins, to make sound great by a lot of exhaust manufacturers, but with the baffle in this Dominator, it sounded particularly not awesome. But regardless of my personal opinions on how it sounds, we went ahead and built mapping for that first. The bike with our custom ECU mapping dialed in for this system made about 85.6 horsepower and 52.6 pound-feet of torque to the tire on pump gas once we got the fuel mapping dialed in. Now, obviously, we've tested other full exhaust systems that have baffles in the muffler. The full Akrapovic, for example, has a baffle in place that you can't even remove. And let's see how that compares to this Dominator system, because that's about as apples to apples of comparison as you can get from one full system to another with the baffles in place. And as you can see there, the red line, run 20, is more literally everywhere. That is the Akrapovic full system with the Baffle In. Both of these bikes do have the K&N filter in place, so that is an apples to apples comparison. The Dominator simply underperforms the Acra pretty much everywhere throughout the entire RPM range. So does it perform as well as the Acra does with the Baffle In? No. Does the Acra sound better with the Baffle In? Yeah, in my opinion, it definitely does. But regardless, that's going to be a very small subset of the market for these bikes, because ultimately folks are looking to maximize performance when they install aftermarket exhaust systems, and to do that, you're pulling the Baffle Out. And with the Baffle Out, you can see the red line there, run 22, the performance is improved dramatically, especially right off the bottom at, say, around 3,000–4,000 RPMs. It is a huge performance improvement. There is some very small dip right there, right around 5,500 RPMs, but you're talking fractions of a horsepower, not the enormous difference that you see with the Baffle Out right off the bottom of the RPM range. And at the top end, there's 2 to 3 horsepower more pretty much everywhere after 6,000 RPMs with the Baffle Out. Now, for those of you that maybe want to experiment with the Baffle In versus the Baffle Out on your Dominator exhaust system, I have one word of caution before you do that. When you're sending in your ECU to get properly tuned and dialed in for your exhaust and intake combination, you really need to let us know if you are going to run the Baffle In or out, especially with a pipe like this Dominator exhaust system. I say that because the fueling needs, especially right off the bottom where there's 10% more torque and 10% more horsepower with the Baffle Out, are dramatically different. There is almost 15% more fuel at wide open throttle necessary right off the bottom where you have that additional power with the Baffle Out versus the Baffle In. Running it with the Baffle Out mapping but the Baffle installed would be way too rich, and vice versa if you decide to go ahead and pull the Baffle Out but you've got it set up for the Baffle In, it's pretty freaking lean right off the bottom of the RPM range. So just make sure that you figure that out and make that choice before you go ahead and send us your ECU so we can make sure that the fuel mapping is properly dialed in for your specific setup. Now, just for the sake of comparison and fairness, let's go ahead and show a Acra header with the Yosh muffler without the baffle, which is relatively comparable to the sound as far as decibels are concerned of the Dominator exhaust without the baffle, and you can see the performance differences for yourself. The red line there, run 21, was our best run with the Acra header and the Yosh muffler with the Baffle Out, and the blue line there is how the bike is right now with the Dominator header and the Dominator muffler with no baffle installed. You can see that the Yosh muffler with the Acra header does make noticeably more power and torque between 6,000 and 8,000 RPMs, but the performance is nearly identical all the way until about 6,000 RPMs, and then from about 8,000 RPMs all the way to the rev limiter. So from an outright performance standpoint, whether you have the Baffle In or the Baffle Out, is the Dominator the best pipe for this bike? No. But that honestly won't matter to most folks that are buying this pipe and want the high mount variant. Because if you have one of these bikes and you're buying a high mount exhaust, you're not really concerned about every 1 or 2 horsepower the bike can possibly create. You are simply trying to get the exhaust system from down here, up here, and out of the way, so you can do some much more aggressive hard enduro and trail riding that the stock exhaust or any of the other full systems we've shown so far simply aren't ideally positioned to do. They make more power, but they also will be more easily damaged because they're simply much lower on the bike itself and therefore much closer to the ground and objects that you're going to find in those types of riding conditions. Now, because this is sure to be a popular choice for a lot of Transalp owners out there looking to do more technical riding or harder enduro riding, because of the location of the pipe, we're stoked to have gotten one and to build custom ECU mapping for it, again, both with Baffle In and Baffle Out. So no matter what way you're going with your Dominator exhaust system, we've got you covered here with the highest quality custom intake and exhaust specific mapping that you can possibly find for this platform right here at Tool Dynaworks. Now, the important thing to stress here is that while it's fun to compare one exhaust system to another in terms of outright performance here on the dyno, it is not what you should be worrying about as the owner of a new Transalp. Pick the pipe that looks best, sounds the best, in your opinion, and functions the best for the specific riding that you're going to be doing, because no matter what, once you send us the ECU, the performance improvements are absolutely insane, regardless of what system you go with. For example, compared to stock, which is the red line you see there on the screen, run 14, the bike now makes 25% more torque right off the bottom and 25% more power at the very top end of the RPM range with our custom ECU mapping in place. And 25% more power and torque is life-changing. So don't stress about the 1 or 2 horsepower differences from one pipe to another. Pick what you like the most, send us your ECU, and you will not be disappointed. Our mail and ECU flashing service for these bikes is available on our website, tooldynaworks.com, and as always, if you have any questions whatsoever about getting your Transalp tuned, or if we have support for your specific intake and exhaust system, do not hesitate to email us at support@tooldynaworks.com, because we are always happy to help.